Thank you for joining us. It's a delight to have Chris with us. Chris is a manager at Drift and has had great experience running his own custom fly tying operation at Yeti Fish. And you can check that out online. It's an interesting organization and has won some unusual awards around fly fishing and tying. Many too many for somebody that young. So welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us tonight. Chris is going to introduce us to an exciting topic around Spanish flies. It won't be the aphrodisiac kind. It will be how to fish in a very pressured environment. And we'll teach us a few things about, probably comment on some of his experiences there as well. So thank you for doing the fly tying tonight and for sharing some of your experiences with us, Chris.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. So it was fun. So yeah, for those who haven't met me, not many here, but it would be great to meet you in person one day. Chris, manage Drift Outfitters said, and just recently a member of Team Canada as well. We just got back about 2 weeks ago from fishing the World Championships in Spain, which is a really great experience. So this topic was, fresh on the brain. We've been fishing some of these patterns and sort of in this style for some time, getting ready for this, and just frankly because it's a better technique. It's not that it's especially good only in Spain. It's just they've got figured out really well. So I'll show some flies today. I'll talk a little bit about how the Spanish fish them, and just maybe some general tips without getting too techy to maybe improve your dry fly fishing a little bit. So yeah, this should be fun. I think I've laid out 3 or 4 patterns that we'll tie, and then feel free to just pepper in questions as they come to mind there. First one I'm going to tie for you, it's kind of a weird fly. I mean, I guess not many of you have seen, but it might be a little bit more familiar than it looks. It's called the Rojo Baron, Red Baron, and it's an attractor fly. Before I get too far ahead of myself, this is a size 16 Panic U130. That's what I'll be tying most of these on. It's just their standard dry fly hook, really sticky, sharp, prefab barbless hook. If you haven't tied on barbless made hooks before, you're still squishing barbs, I'd recommend you give them a look. You lose less fish on them. And the reason is, position that so you can see it, is they have very long points for how big the hook is. And that's important because when the hook goes in without a barb, the longer it has to be pulled to come back out, the less likely it is to pop out of the fish as you're fighting it. You'll also see it has sort of this little bit of an in-turn sort of deep point, and that just helps retain fish without the presence of a barb. That little bit of an angle change is common size. Thread, this is just Vivas. I like small thread. I'm over so you can read it, maybe. That's not inverse. It's Vivas 16-aught in black. Tail on this fly is going to be cocked down. About shank length, or if anything, a little bit on the short side of the tail. That's about right. And for the body, this is where, say, it's going to look maybe a little foreign. Reason this, it's red hare's ear dubbing, like a pretty bright red color hare's ear. And it is pretty gaudy, this fly. Keep it thin. And you'll see one common theme with all the flies today is that all the winging is going to be done with CDC. So Europeans in general are huge on CDC. For those not familiar with it, it's cul de canard, which is butt feathers from a duck. Ducks in around their rears have an oil gland, which they use to get oil from and use it to clean their feathers for waterproofing. The big thing with CDC is that you want to use really good quality stuff. And in my experience, if you get dyed colors of CDC, it's never as good, because what happens with dyes, one, feathers usually have to be washed to dye them to get the oils out. Otherwise, the dyes don't take. So I've got two nice feathers here. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find kind of a sweet spot on both of them. So the way I think of that is you get on these feathers, there's going to be a bunch of like, I don't know how to describe it. It's really soft, wetty kind of fluff at the bottom. I don't really like that. I'll actually strip that right off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw these fibers together, and I'm going to inch my way up a little bit from the base there. This is the fun part, and this is why you want thin thread. So you take these two feathers here, pull them forward like you do in a wing case, wrap or two to catch them, like so. Okay. I'm going to pull these back and just sneak the wrap in front, so my thread is really well anchored. And I actually like, I don't know if you can see it, but I've got like a little knob on the back end of my vise here. I bring my thread up and around that knob just to hold it out of the way. So just kind of rest it with that. That way it doesn't slip off the eye. Now what I want to do is actually get these fibers into sort of a wing position, but I don't want the stems. The stems don't really add anything when it comes to CDC. They don't help it float anymore, and they make the wing kind of stiff. So what you want to do is kind of grab both stalks here, and then you're going to pull back all the barbs off the side. So yeah, pull the barbs back, pull them right back over where they came from, and take my thread back, go over it a few times here. So now I've just got a wing that's just barbs, no stalk. Again, I'll sneak my thread just in front of that to keep it from slipping far away. So you got to cut these without clogging up the eye. So just get in there as tight as you can. I'll do that up a bit. Don't go so tight that it slips. You've only got a couple wraps of thread holding those barbs back. If you got that tied back, that would actually be a pretty fishable fly as is. What you want to do now, though, and this isn't for the reason you think. So I've got all this big clump of CDC sticking back up top. I'm going to split that into two sort of wings. Think of them as. The way I do that is I just kind of roughly grab CDC and split it in two. You don't have to be absolutely exact, just roughly. And then just gonna bring it around front to back this time, go the other way. That's all. I don't need to go any crazier than that. It's not even to create a defined wing effect. It's more just to splay the fibers, to keep them kind of splayed in that wing position. And what it does, if you imagine you sort of create a parachute on top of the fly by splaying those fibers. So when it falls, it catches more air and lands right side up more reliably. It's sort of like a Comparadon style wing once it's all said and done, not too far. At this point, you could finish it up. Because the Spanish are known for fishing these things at longer range, trick I'll show you. And again, it's not revolutionary. People have been doing this for a long time. It's just a cider. It's a high visibility post. This is a Glow Bright Floss. So I just take, a little piece of that, a couple inches long. I double it around my thread. I pull it up, so, and then just use that thread tension to place it right on top. What I like to do for dry flies especially is cement them before I whip finish. Getting head cement on these things, it's such a small head to begin with. It gets messy. So what I really like, just brush on, zap a gap, simply. Take that, just wipe a little bit onto the thread. Couple wraps, glue it up. Okay. I'm gonna take the Glow Bright, pull it up tight. We're gonna cut it really pretty short, maybe an 1/8 of an inch. Not really any longer than that. And then this wing is a little much right now, so we're going to tear it down a little bit too. You can cut it or tear it. As far as length goes, pull all the fibers back and cut them to be maybe about halfway the length of the tape, if that makes sense. You don't want to go with a super short wing. If it's super short, you lose a lot of buoyancy for one. And then also, again, just doesn't land as reliably. Okay. So do not, on CDC flies, use gel. That's number one. There are some gels out there that I guess work on CDC. I don't use them. But in general, what they do, they just mat down those fibers and it doesn't help them at all. The desiccant is what you want to use. And what I would always do is I would fish a fly first, dry out the box, because in theory it should float, and it does. As you say, it can get waterlogged fairly easily. And then afterwards, I would go ahead and dress it up. What I was enlightened to when I was over there by our guide, Abby, was do it first. Take the powder, rub it right into the wing pretty generously, first thing before you make a cast. And it goes a lot longer that way. But then after it gets waterlogged, if you've never fished one of these, like right after you catch a fish, that fly will not float at all. The slime completely mats it down. It's done. So if that's the case, what you have to do first is rinse it off. It doesn't take much. Just take the fly, put it in the water, give it a little swirl in the water. The slime will all come off. That's the first thing you have to do before dressing it. Then all you want to do is you dry out the wing a bit. So you can use a shirt sleeve and just like rub it against there. That'll work pretty well. You can also just take it and like bring it right up to your lips and give it a good blow. And that'll take most of the moisture off too. And then you take your powder float, which again, I wish I had here. But if you imagine this hair stacker was a bottle of that powder desiccant, what you do, take your finger, put it in there, get a bunch of it on your finger, and then rub it onto the fly. Instead of taking the whole fly, dunking it in the thing and shaking it like most people do. That works fine. It floats fine, but it causes the whole fly to float really high. And it wastes a lot of floating too. All you really need to do is just dust up the wing. That's the only part that you want floating anyway. The body and stuff you'd like to be like in the film. So yeah, just on your finger, take it, dust it up a bit, and you're good. A good tip, if you do that technique, is use so whatever your casting hand is, use that hand and use your pinky finger. And the reason is it's desiccant. It will dry your skin out entirely and you lose a lot of dexterity. And I'm not kidding, you notice it. You lose a lot of dexterity with that finger. This finger doesn't matter. You don't use it for line control or anything. Every other finger you'd rather keep. You can also get that desiccant with like a brush applicator. Those work well too. and you can just brush it into the wing same kind of way.
You show us the fly from the top down. So you did something to, I kind of zoned out. You did split the wing.
Yeah, again, I'm not gonna make perfect wing effect, but just splaying it. So I did just sort of like a once around this way and then once around this way.
Just to kind of divide it into two a little bit.
Just a fan of that.
Yeah, but it's not like a full. It's not like a full X. It's just like a crude divide.
I just don't want, because when you pull it straight back, it tends to want to sit almost vertical. That doesn't really do anything. Like you want to create, basic buoyancy. Like you have to create a bit of a footprint for it to displace enough water to float well. And land right. So you're just trying to splay it out.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, so one thing that we were really impressed by over there is we fished a bit of dry dropper, and we found that these flies could hold up a 2.5 mil, a 3 millimeter tungsten bead underneath it. That's like, it's between 7/64 and 1/8 of an inch. So like a pretty substantial tungsten bead, these things could hold up even in the 18 size. CDC just has a much more natural footprint on the water. So where I can, I prefer to use CDC. And the thing with collars is that, they do a couple things. One, they distort how the fly sits on the water. So if you imagine you have like an upright hackled, thing here, and it's got hackle below it, like, traditional Adams or any Catskill style fly, it tends to prop it up on angle, right? So if you can imagine, the tail kind of sits up and then the hackle faces down, and between those it forms a little triangle that sits on. It's not how a bug sits in the water. So I always prefer a body that's going to sit flush. And then the other thing is it kind of clogs up that hook point. Doesn't seem like much, but you're dealing with a small fly here. And that gap really matters. So if you have a hackle, especially a dense one coming down here, I can guarantee you miss fish just because it, glances off a fish's mouth without pricking it. So if I do fish a hackled fly, what I always do is I always flip the hackle on the bottom of the fly. All right, cool. Let's move on to the next thing. You see, this is a bit of a different hook, curved hook. This is a hook I really like. It's the Hannock 390. So this is a fly I really like, 16, 18, 20, smaller sizes. And this is like a little olive emerger. Again, Spanish fly, can't take that for any of these. Been around for a bit of time, but really, really good right out here. Same thread, just black, 60 knot. Start up with the eye. And for this, you'll take that thread and you'll go down a good ways on this hook, right down around that bend. Around there. Pretty well wherever you want. I kind of like just using hare's ear dubbing. So this is a hare's ear plus, so it has a little bit of antron in it. So take a little clump here of this stuff. And the trick is to get to kind of line up, out of the pack. Here's your dubbing. It's not very long stuff, so it kind of comes scrambled. So I just take it, I kind of pull it apart, stack it on top of each other. I'll kind of roll it up in my fingers just to get something that's easy to hang on to. And then I'm just going to tie it. I don't really care about length, so I'm just going to cut it to length afterwards. So I'll just tie it in like, nice and long off the butt here. Keep that for later. You can use different stuff for the body here. I kind of like turkey bites. And the reason is that they're a little less fuss. I think they're a little more durable. So turkey bite is like a goose bite, super sized. You just pull one off the stem here. I've got two sides, but I will screw it up and have to do this twice. I can never remember which is which. But basically, the way that most people tie this stuff in, actually, here we go. I'll use my incompetence as an excuse to show you how it usually looks versus how it looks like. Yeah. So this is how most people wrap it. They tie it on this side, that as you wrap it, I actually did get backwards, but whatever. You can see how it's got these little raised edges, very slightly raised. That's fine. I like tying it the other way. So you actually don't get the effect that most people like in a church. If you get it wrong, it really doesn't matter, I don't think. Let's tie it in toward the tip, toward the skinny end. I'm just going to take it and start wrapping. And what I want to do is overlap wraps so that I cover up any of that fuzzy stuff. It's going to be a little hard to hang on to, so feel free to use like half the pliers or something. I'll take it up almost to the head of the fly there. That's my body done. This one I'm going to tie differently though, flipping it forward. So the tips are facing forward to start. Same kind of thing, tying them in just above where those fibers start. Again, cut the butts close. So now on a really small fly, you could just skip this part, but this is a size 18, like it's got a little profile. So I like to put in a little bit of a thorax. I'm just going to use that same hair's ear dubbing here. Just a very small pinch. Just to cover up some of these loose ends. These thread wraps. So, and then from here, this should look pretty familiar. And this just on smaller hooks, this way of tying in the CDC can be a little bit more manageable, I find. Which can get a little tight on small hooks. So, and same thing. So we're just going to split that wing. So this is what I mean. This is how the wing sits naturally. It's really stood up straight. Doesn't have that nice broad profile. So I'm going to make one wrap. Usually I start from behind. Kind of come through more or less in the middle of that. So see it's starting to splay. I'll come front to back here. Out a little bit through there. So you can see it's just a little more splayed. And then same thing, you don't have to use the cider. I tie some with, some without. I don't think it's going to do you any harm on most fish. There might be the occasional fish that sees it and thinks better of it, but I don't think I truly respected until this trip that we were on how softly a fish can eat a fly. There were times on very slow pools where we had a clear sight of our fly where the fly just disappears. Like there's no rise, there's no dimple, nothing. No weight, nothing. It looks like the fly just gets waterlogged and just slips under the surface. and you'd lift up and there'd be a fish. So without seeing the fly, you'll miss those obviously. So make sure you can see the flies. That's where the sighter comes in. I usually trade visibility for that little bit of unnatural look. For the shuck, just put it kind of short, half centimeter, if that. And that's it. That's the buy it emerger, little olive. This thing is really, really good. So this is going to be another fly. I know we've shown around a little bit in the past. It's a hare's ear mayfly. So again, this is a 16. I would tie this and pretty well, again, any standard tetrad size. So anything like a 14 down to a 20, very doable. This is at 16, again, 130, just sort of straight dry fly hook. Same 16-aught thread down to the bend. You can use different stuff again for the tail here. You could use that cocktail or whatever. I've got a hare's mask. I'm just going to use a few guard hairs. Just a little pinch of guard hairs here. Keep it sparse and keep it short. Think of this as more like a shuck than a tail. If you do it full length, I find it looks really weird. So do it like, half to 2/3 body length. So just a short little tail, just hare's ear, guard hairs. Body up the butt ends. Again, really simple fly. I'm going to go back to hare's mask and just take another little clipping of hair, which I'm just going to use in the more traditional sense of dubbing. Just a sparse amount. These are mayflies, so I'm looking to keep it pretty thin. Just enough to kind of coat the body. A little bit of profile. Something like that. And then the wing, you're pretty familiar with by now. Just finding, again, 2 nice feathers, strip off the fluff, line up the butts. So, again, this is a little bit bigger hook, so I'm just going to tie them tips back. By tying them tips back, I think you actually get maybe a few more fibers incorporated into it. With a little bit more of that hare's ear dubbing. And make sure to leave a fair bit of room at the head there. Just give yourself something to work with. Pull this over the top. Grab these, pull all the fibers you can find back. Tie them back. Splay it out a little bit. Again, cider if you want it. Super glue. So, bring this long enough you can see it, but not too long. And then wing, we'll just snip it in around length tail on this one since it's a short tail. And that's it. Note. And that's your hair zero dry. So just a really good, I mean, think of it like Spanish Adams, like just a really, grab, all-purpose mayfly. I don't know.
Chris, do you have a special preference for CDC makers or?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of good ones out there. This is one we stock in the shop that I use a lot. It's just the hen stuff, and we sell 2 different bags. Maybe I shouldn't do this, but get the big one. So this is it's the 1 gram bag. The last one I'll show you, and this is one I tie. I guess I have maybe fished it in a 16, but really 18, 20, 22, like small sizes. And that's because it's a midge. So if the last one was Spanish Adams, this is a Spanish Griffith snap. Very exotic, same thread, black 16 ounce. This one is about as simple as it gets. The winging style on this one is the same, but different. And then I'm actually going to tie in the CDC first. That's just how I find it easiest to manage on the really small hooks. I'm going to tie them forward again, because again, I think this is just easier to manage on the small hook. 2 feathers, paired up, tying forwards. On down, snip the butts. The body on this one is peacock roll. I imagine everyone's worked with these, but I just like to break off like the top third. I'm in by the tips. And just tie them all the way down again, have around that bend, about halfway down that bend. Give them a little bit of a twist. I'm just gonna wrap them up. You'll see that area that I cleaned up behind the CDC. I'm gonna go right over it. Pretty much, maybe I'll leave a little gap, but pretty much right up to that CDC. I just take my thread and I go right through that body, all the way back down and then back up. Peacock's super brittle, so fish's teeth can nick it pretty easily. You'll see small fly like this. I don't really care if some of those fibers get matted down. I just want that general iridescent black kind of look. The 16-aught thread disappears under that pretty well. We're almost there. Pull back a bunch of fibers. And go. And so you could take this winging style and just, go wild with it, obviously. Use whatever you want for bodies, books and stuff. Whatever you like. And so that's the little peacock midge. So again, Spanish Griffith snap, right? But to talk a little bit about kind of how we're fishing these. So I spoke a little bit about that already. Some other general tips though. So yeah, positioning, make sure you kind of see the flies, it's great. Make sure the fly floats well, dress it up beforehand. A lot of dry fly fishing though is kind of made or missed in your setup. before the fly. Like flies, honestly, you hear it all the time and nobody ever believes it, but it's secondary to a certain extent. As long as you have, a decent looking fly, not a giant, ridiculous thing on the end. Fly is very much secondary for the most part. I think we all know roughly what fish are going to be eating on a given day. So it's presentation. And presentation, people think of as, I think a lot to do with just casting skill. And that is a very big part of it, right? Being able to put that fly where you want it, getting it to drift the right way, all that. But there are setups where it's nearly impossible to get a good drift. So, what do I mean by that? So I think everyone's familiar with the drag-free drift. Now you want to get the thing floating at the same speed as the current, whether it's fast or slow, because that's how bugs drift. And so the way that you do that, specifically with dries, it's very difficult to do without it, is by putting slack in the leader. And that's not a new concept. I know I'm not shattering any preconceived notions there. We've all been taught the parachute cast, the wiggle cast, even though it doesn't work. So slack isn't exactly a new concept to a lot of people, but where it is, I think, to a lot of people is the fact that you want it in your leader more than anything, and really to tip it specifically. So the reason why I joke, again, I get this from me, and I can't even take credit for my own pet peeve, but why a wiggle cast doesn't work well is because what happens with a wiggle cast is that, I assume everyone knows what I mean, but maybe not. It's where you cast, stop the rod, and then give it a little shake, and it throws like wiggles into your cast. The reason it doesn't work, it's a strong word. It works to a certain extent, but not in the way that you'd like it to. Is that wiggle cast is what we call an aerial mend. It's not actually a cast. A cast is only something that happens while the rod's moving. After the rod is stopped and the cast is being delivered, it doesn't actually really matter what you do to the rod, because the fly is already going in its preconceived direction, and the leader's going to kind of do what it does. So a mend is just anything that you do to move the line after the cast has been made. So we're familiar with how that happens on the water. You lay it down. Okay, the current's dragging this way. I'll flip my line up. An aerial mend, everybody knows, or a reach mend. Make your cast, drop it to the side. That's a great cast, but it doesn't fundamentally change the cast. The cast has already been delivered to its target, and then you're just altering that. A wiggle cast, what it does is it puts slack into the line. And so that's great. And slack, just so everyone understands why it's important, is rivers don't flow straight. They flow with many different currents. And so if you lay something straight, the fastest current is going to start pulling out one way, maybe slow current pulls the other. And so it's dragging instantly. And so wiggle casts, I guess, solves the line part. But what takes effect before the line being straight or not is the leader, because that's what the fly is attached to. And so a good dry fly drift starts with slack in the leader. And George Harvey knew this ages ago. Harvey was big in 50s, 60s. So it's not new. There's the George Harvey slackline leader. You can look it up. It's a great leader if you don't know it. And his concept was just, it's got a relatively stiff butt section. So it straightens, gives you some accuracy with your leader, your cast. But then it's got this long, fine stretch of tip at the end, which if you cast it right and kind of shock it, doesn't really turn over. It might, shoot a little bit of slack, and the tippet lands with the little S curves, as you would call it, in there. And then that, slack in the leader allows the currents to play with it, and it can move around and, swirl around, and the fly can just do what it does. It can just sit there regardless of how the currents interact with the leader. And so what, specifically the Spanish, but French and lots of very good European anglers have figured out is that we can improve on this. I don't even know if the Americans figured it out first. Maybe the Europeans, for all I know, figured it out ages ago. But we can improve on this and take it to an extreme, which is very long leaders. So Spanish are fishing leaders in about 19 feet. And you may say, well, they must have fished really big rivers. We were fishing rivers about the size of the Credit. And not the Credit down in Mississauga, the Credit in Caledon. And so it takes a little practice to get that, to cast with accuracy. But the really key thing is that of that 19 feet, 6 to 8 feet of that is tippet. And that tippet is nearly impossible to straighten. It wants to crumple. It wants to land in little piles. Not so much that you can't cast it with any accuracy. We're talking about controllable amounts of slack here, not just a pile of line on the water, but that slack really lets it move and dance. So you don't have to take it to that extreme. I'd say if you haven't played around with it, check out the George Harvey leader. It's a really good place to start. Or take your own favorite leader formula, just a basic, medium stiff 9-foot leader, and then try adding a bunch of tippet onto the end. See what it's like if you add, 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, up to 8-9 feet of tippet, and just see how controllable it is and see how your drift improves. I almost guarantee it will. The other thing that you'll find that we're doing is fishing very thin tippet. And so people, when they think about tippet sizes, they think about spooking fish and visibility of the tippet, which is a part of it. But I think we can probably all agree that most fish don't care the difference between 6x to 7x to 8x too much. But what it does do is it makes a huge difference in how your drift plays out for a couple reasons. So, and this works nymphing and dry fly for the same reason. So if you think about it, the thinner diameter of the line, the less surface area on it and the less pull that a current has on that line. So when we think about in terms of nymphing, a lot of people talk about how quickly it cuts through the water and sinks. Something thinner, just like a thin knife, is going to just kind of slice through the water nicely. But what it also does is it means when the current pushes against that line, it has less grip on it, because the current's never even, top to bottom, left to right. It's always different. So your fly's in one zone, but wherever your leader's passing through is in a different one. So it's important that whatever area your leader's in, the current doesn't have an outsized impact on how it is moving. And the same thing works above the water. So if you look at, a leader, fly line, whatever it may be, the thicker diameter stuff, it's never levitating on the water. It's in the film somewhere. And so it's exposed to those currents. And the thicker diameter it is, the more pull those currents have on it. So that's part one, is you'll find that thinner stuff just drifts cleaner to start with. The current has less impact on it. The second reason that thin tippet is really nice is that it's soft. So if you're fishing small flies, like we're talking 18s and stuff here, if you imagine that fly size gets pulled with a certain amount of force by the current, a larger fly is more exposed to that current, and so the current pulls it with more force in whatever direction the current should be pulling it. But a small fly doesn't have a lot of purchase on the water, or the water doesn't have a lot of purchase on it. And so it doesn't pull the thing with as much force. I don't know if that makes sense. And so you got to think that then whatever tippet is trailing behind the flies, it's being pulled along with minimal force. The tippet has to follow freely without being restrictive and pulling back on it. And just the difference between 6x to 7x or something like that can have a really big impact on just how cleanly the thing is able to drift, because even if it's got flack, the stiffness can kind of hold it back. Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Your discussion of tippet got me thinking about a question, sort of not directly related, but sort of tangential. I've heard some people prefer fluorocarbon for dry flies, just so that you don't get the surface tension view down below. I'm just wondering your thought on that, either in terms of optics or in terms of drag. Do you have any thoughts on using fluorocarbon, or maybe even sinking the fly?
Yep, for sure. So it's not wrong. It can help. So I've done it. Generally, I wouldn't recommend it unless you're talking really small diameters, though. Heavier, like thicker fluoro sinks, for anyone not familiar, nylon floats until it gets waterlogged. And so what you're referencing there is just the fact that think of like a bug sitting on the surface. There's an imprint in the surface film, and so that's very visible. Even a small tippet, if it leaves a dimple in the water, can really turn fish off in slow water. And we think about that along lakes, especially slow moving rivers. That can be a big thing too. And so, what James is saying here is that if You could submerge the tippet a little bit, get that tippet dropping below the surface film. You wouldn't have that effect. It might be stealthier. And so it does work on small stuff. I wouldn't recommend it anything heavier than 7x, even with a decent sized fly. Part of the reason is that you'll start getting into some weird stuff with currents again, in my experience. Where if you imagine an nylon that's on the surface of the water, and it might only be half submerged in the water, only half the surface area of that line is actually at play when it comes to the currents pulling on it. You submerge the thing, now 100% is. So I think sometimes the currents do wackier things if you have a little bit of a thicker tippet. And I know this sounds like stupid hair splitting here, literal hair splitting when we're talking about, a thousandth of an inch here and there, but it can make a big difference in small flies, especially. So there's a couple ways around it. One, I'm of the mind that as long as you have a little bit of pace to the water, fish probably don't pick up on the imprint very easily, unless you're talking extreme spooky fish. So as long as you've got a little ripple to it or whatever, I'm not convinced it's going to make a world of difference unless we're talking really heavy tippets. Second, so the drift thing. And the other thing you can do if you're not fishing that really thin stuff, but don't want it to show up, really strongly, is you can degrease a leader. So there's stuff you can get. It's called mud. It's there's different brands. Loon makes one, and it's a mix of clay, glycerin, so basically soap, and what's the last one? Can't remember what it is. Something to keep it moist. Can't remember what it is. But what it is, so you smear it onto your line. The clay and very fine particle stuff takes sheen off your line, and the glycerin, and it holds the compound. And the glycerin, think of what happens with soap, it breaks surface tension. So it actually, even with nylon, can actually drop you a little deeper into the film and maybe get you a better drift. So you can experiment with it for sure. I would say, so to my point about if it sinks fully, you might have more issues with drag. It might be less of an issue if that happens in slow water, which is, again, maybe the one place you'd be concerned about it. Faster water, I'd rather have my leader floating pretty high, so that I get a better drift. And that's my next point, is that to get a better drift, regardless of your leader setup, you should always grease your leaders. We don't use grease anymore because it's not eco-friendly. I never was of that age, I guess. But something like a mucilin, like a paillette paste, a silicone paste, basically, is what we're talking about here. And what you do, if you haven't used that before, it's just a soft silicone like putty. You smear it on your line and you smear it on your leader. So just the front part of your line, just the front 10, 15 feet, whatever's touching the water. And then on the butt section, midsection of your leader, don't put on your tippet. You put on your tippet and you'll magnify the effect that James is talking about with the dimpling. But you put on the rest. Two reasons for that. One, less contact with the water. So it raises, it floats everything really well, so it keeps it up higher. So there's less contact with the water, less effects from drag. And secondly is pickup. So what will put a fish down quicker than anything is, I'm sure everyone who's fished dry flies had this happen, where you pick up to recast and your leader is sunk a little bit and it sucks the dry fly under to start, and you get like a popping noise. It's like a bass popper. That will spook fish more than probably anything. And the other thing you get that's a little less extreme is water spray. So if it's been gripping the water and you lift it up, you get a little spray off the line. That I think can spook fish too. By putting the grease on, you flow it higher, and when you pick it up, it's super quiet. It just floats off the water and you can recast really well. So you get better drift and better casts. And that's basically it.
A word of caution, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to attach a fluorocarbon, a very fine fluorocarbon tippet, you might want to use a little tippet ring to attach it to the end of your leader.
Yeah,
because if you attach it to a nylon leader, you go to set the hook, it will frequently break right where the knot is. You have to be careful what knot you use. You can't use surgeon's knot. You can use 2 uni knots. That will work pretty well. Or you can use a little tippet ring. I've had it cut through the The tippet just cut through time and time again till I figured that out. Just a word of caution.
Yeah. Personally, I know what you mean, Sheldon. I've heard a lot of people say it. I can't say I've ever actually had that experience, but for what it's worth, I do use generally a very small tippet ring, like very small as you can find.
Precisely, as small as you can get.
Yeah, for sure. And it'll float pretty well on its own, but if you grease it, it'll float very easily.
So, Chris, do the Spanish use longer, softer rods in order to compensate for the long tippet?
So interestingly, yes and no. So longer, yes. And the reasons are two: one that everybody will care about and one that you won't probably. So the one that you won't care about, maybe, unless you're thinking of getting into competitions, is in competitions, as a rule, you can only use a leader up to 2 times the length of the rod. If that wasn't in place, they'd probably fish longer leaders, honestly. So they use a little bit of longer rods so that they can get away with a longer leader as far as the rules go. But a longer rod just makes that leader more manageable too. If you think you're trying to pick up that leader off the water, why wouldn't you want more length? So we're using 2 to 3 weight rods, nothing heavier, for a couple of reasons I'll dive into in a sec, but you already understand, even if you don't know where I'm going with that. So you're using very light rods, but they're using pretty fast rods. And the reason that you want a fast rod is accuracy. So accuracy and maybe hook setting to a certain extent, I guess. But when it comes to casting, fast is accurate because you can throw a much tighter loop. You can really, and a much more condensed action. So I always get out when I'm thinking about accuracy casting. You can be accurate with any rod, no matter the price, no matter what. It's all technique. However, what I think does make you more consistent is being able to use a shorter stroke. So if you think about just the muscle control involved, I don't know how technical everyone's casting is, but if you have a softer rod, you have to use a longer stroke, longer and smoother, maybe a little slower to a certain extent. So, your stroke for whatever length line it is, maybe on a slower rod, is from here to here, which isn't uncomfortable. It's not going to tire you out much. But it's a fairly long ways to travel. For a trout cast, that's probably 40 feet or less. A fast rod, you can make the same cast here. And so you can think that as far as repetition is concerned, and being able to place things where you want a repeatable action. This is a lot easier to control than this. So you may say, well, fast rods, sure, but they suck at presentation. They're hard to fight fish on light line with. Yes and no. So remember, we're using 2 and 3 weight rods. So fast is a relative term. They don't flex particularly deeply, but they still have a decent bit of flex to them. They're still light rods. They can still protect the light tip, but especially with a little practice, pretty well. And as far as presentation goes, just don't slap the line on the water. If you're stopping where you're supposed to stop, and that leader is straight, or not straightening, but the line is straightening in the air, it's landing with the same amount of force, whether it's fast or slow rod. That shouldn't actually affect it at all. So it's really about the accuracy. And the reason, to circle back around to why you want lighter rods and not 4 weights, 5 weights, apart from the fact that's hard to fish light tippet on heavier rods, is drift again. So thick fly lines also don't work as well when you're talking about getting a clean drift. And we're taking things to the extreme here. Fish wherever you want. A 4-weight is perfectly capable of catching fish. But if you want better fishing, better drifts, lighter lines, paired with that light leader and a long leader, there's just less sitting on the water. There's less pull from the current. And they land softer, right? Even if you deaden a line in the air, there's just more weight in a 4-weight. So it lands a little harder than a 2-weight does, if that makes sense. I wouldn't get too caught up on the absolute technicals. If I was to take away anything here, assuming you're going from just standard kind of North American 9-foot 5X leaders, maybe consider going a little lighter on the leader, but definitely go longer on the tippet. Grease your leader. That's kind of the big stuff.
Thanks. You've actually answered a question of mine that I had been bothered with. Typically, I'll buy a 5X 9-foot leader and then, of course, tie onto it and build the leader. When I've used it a few times, it's got to be rebuilt, so I'll build it up. And I have always added a long, thin section of tippet at the end. And I had a problem with it because I couldn't understand why it wasn't turning over. And there was an added benefit to it because the whole leader would turn over except for that little section, but it would flare down and land perfectly like a fly landing on water, which is excellent, but I wanted it to turn over.
Yeah.
And you've asked that for me, so.
Yeah, no, it frankly is, so it's a battle between, you know, casters and anglers. If you want to, you know, break into two groups where, you know, casting instructors, you know, teach people to straighten leaders. You know, the goal of this class is to straighten a leader. In reality, there's very few situations where actually, well, not very few, but in trout fishing, there are very few when you want a straight leader. So, you know, if you're fishing bonefish and you spot a fish and you want to know exactly where your leader is going to land and you want to be tight to your fly so you can move it and set the hook as soon as it lands, great. Straight leader is perfect. Or on a lake, you know, you're casting, you want to feel your flies right away. Great. Specifically, you'll see most of these examples are streamers. But if you're fishing a nymph, you know, if you have tight line right away, the nymph's not going to be allowed to actually free fall, and it's not going to be allowed to drift as naturally as it could be. So tight lines when it comes to nymphing are not good. Tight lines when it comes to dries, for the same reason, not so good. So yeah, no, I'd say you're pretty well on the money there.
One constant thread I'm finding now between Euro nymphing and dry fly fishing is it's all about the visual. It's not the feel. If you feel it, you've left it too late.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. If you're feeling a dry fly fish, you're leaving it really late, especially. I'd say nymph you can be forgiven here and there, but yeah. You want to be able to see what's happening, and so when I say, you know, it's important to see your dry fly so you can see if you've gotten a take and see if you've gotten a good drift. It's just as important to be able to see the water, right? So you want to put yourself in a place where you can see lots of water, you know, have a good visual around the pool, around your surroundings, but also, you know, not with the sun in your eyes and stuff like that, because you want to be able to see, you know, are there bugs, are fish rising that maybe I would have missed otherwise. So positioning in that sense is really key, and just being observant.
You've spoken a lot about dries and nymphs in your competition. Do you ever swing a wet fly?
Yep, that can be a good one in the right water type for sure. Yeah, especially if you don't exactly know where fish are going to be sitting, right? If you've got like, you know, wider runs and stuff. I don't do it that much. I'm not that amazing at it. You know, there's some people where it's just their specialty. Some guys on the Canadian team past years, it's been their thing, and they've won entire competitions on wet flies. It can be a very good technique in the right water type. I think that, you know, if you're talking about places where the fish are, and maybe I'm mistaken, maybe this is just my lack of expertise fishing wets, but if fish are really going to be relaying to a piece of structure where you really know where they're going to be sitting, I think usually you're probably better targeting them, you know, a dry or a nymph, because you can be a little bit more precise. I think of a wet as a way to fan a lot of water and find fish in more open places. But they're a great technique. And like competitions are won on streamers too. Like, you know, all the stuff is fair game, and in the right conditions, anything could and will work.
One of the reasons I mentioned it was because when you were talking about hare's ear, mayfly imitation, if your CDC flyers or feathers rather get a little waterlogged, the hare's ear is going to get waterlogged, then you could extend your casts a few more times because you've now got a subsurface fly.
You could, yeah. I mean, if I think that wet fly is the ticket, I'm probably just gonna fish a wet. It's probably just gonna fish a little better. But you're bang on. The number of times that I've got flies or fish on waterlogged flies is a few. I do that a lot with nymphs though. So if you're fishing a nymph and you start seeing fish rising or rolling, I'll start swinging my drifts out with a thing. It's great. Like on the ground, you get, you know, you'd be fishing along and some stupid little stocky starts rising 10 feet below you, and you nymphing along, you just kind of swing it out to the side and you can pick them off. Yeah, some guys leaving fish nymphs like streamers. Like you can pull a little nymph out, like a very small nymph. Once you start stripping it, it just looks like a very small bait fish. So you can get real creative for sure.
Chris, I'm just conscious we've had you for a good long time here, and you've been a wealth. So thank you for walking us through all 4 ties and sharing your thoughts on techniques that can open it up and be more subtle and get a better drift and drag-free drift. I've taken some notes and learned a ton that I want to practice if I can remember it by the time next spring rolls around. So thank you for walking us through all of that and answering all of our questions and sharing your perspective.